Hey artists, welcome to our third step in our lake life unit. We are working on our lake house. You should have at this point a background, your house, and a walkway of some sort that shows 1 point perspective. So today what we're going to do is we're going to actually start adding some color. Now, different than other assignments, I'm going to give you some options for color. You can use marker, colored pencil, watercolor, watercolor pencils, anything that your heart desires, as long as you can still keep the details in your house. So I don't want to see your color erase those details. If you use something like pastels, that's going to be really hard to keep the details. So just use something that you can still hang on to the details. So for this week, your goal is to get half of this colored. I'm not going to give you the whole thing because this is our last project. I really want you to take your time with it. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to focus on my sky and the mountains in the background and maybe some of these trees. And I'm going to actually save my water and my cabin for next week. So what I'm going to use is these set of watercolor pencils I've got. They're called Derwent Inktense pencil watercolor pencils. Now I got these as a gift. These are pretty expensive watercolor pencils, but there's nothing like them as far as intensity. They're called Inktense because the saturation is really, really good, really bright, really vivid. I would love to have a giant set of them, but maybe I'll do that. I'll save up and do that whenever I use these ones up. So I'm going to use those, so you'll get to see a little bit of actually like colored pencil and watercolor used together as I flow through this assignment. So I look forward to seeing you guys' color. I'm going to drop the audio. I may come back on at the end and make some comments, but I'm probably going to kind of speed this up a little bit. I did want to, before we get into it, I did want to remind you, this is the image that I've been working from. You can see there's some very bright colors, and I'm pretty much going to stick to the coloring that you see in this image, except for I think I want to use a sunset. And here's the image I'm using for the colors of the sunset. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because there's a tendency for y'all to make sunsets look like a round circle with rays shooting off the sun, and it kind of looks juvenile. So I wanted to show you and give you an example of how you can do a sunset that doesn't have any of that. This sunset doesn't even have the actual sun in it. I think it's probably over here somewhere on the right behind the clouds where it's kind of the brightest yellow. So I just wanted you guys to see that you don't have to do that, and it's not super complicated to leave it out and just use colors. Again, look up pictures, and you can do what I'm doing here, and I'm marrying the elements in these pictures. I'm going to have some coloring from this, and I'm going to have some from the original that I work from, and I'm going to have some from this sunset that I'm working on. Now I may make the colors a little bit more muted in mine, because the sunset isn't quite as bright a day as the original photo I worked from. But anyway, we'll see how that all flows out. So here I go. Just keep watching, and you can kind of get an idea of how I do this, and I hope it's helpful to you. All right, artists, we're going to jump in here. You'll see I pull up in front of me a picture to work from, and I'm using these watercolor pencils. And so when you use those, you don't have to put this solid layer down. I'm just trying to get the color down, especially with the ones I'm using. They're really, really powerfully, lots of pigment in them,
which is just the intensity of the color. And so I'm just laying a light layer down, and you'll see when I add water, the color just kind of explodes. Um, and I can actually go back when I'm done if I want, when this dries, and add another layer of color. But you'll see how I did this sunset, that there's, it's not a round sun. It's obscured a little bit because of the haze in the sky. So um, you can do the same thing with colored pencils. You just have to lay down a heavier layer of color. I know a lot of you don't have watercolor pencils, so um, or if you use watercolor, you can do the same thing. You just jump right in with a color, and you don't get that two-step process of laying down the color with a pencil and then painting over it. Um, so you'll see here I'm working on this first mountain, and what happens here is I'm completely dissatisfied with it. You'll see I come back to it about 3 times, and just never was happy with it. Just not showing the way I wanted it to. Um, so I just keep working at it. I'm looking at the picture. I'm trying to figure out why I don't like it. And, guys, sometimes as artists, we just can't figure it out. And that's really okay, because uh, sometimes we just can't do it in the moment. Our minds aren't there. Uh, but we don't give up. We just keep working through it, and we get to a place where we're okay with it. And so what I ended up doing was just adding, making it more of solid color. And you'll see that on this next mountain, what I do is I just cover the whole thing with a solid color first, just a light gray. And then when it dries a little bit, I'll go back and add a little bit of detail for the value, which is what I do on this next mountaintop. I'm adding some blue and using black really lightly to create a gray, but it's a little bit darker than the other mountain. And the reason I do that is to show contrast, to show that there's a difference between those two mountains in the depth. And now I'm going back and I'm adding some value into those mountains. And the way that I did that was I was thinking about how would the shadows fall from the light. So the shadows would, on the back sides of those peaks there, on the opposite side of where the light is shining, that's where you're going to get shadows. So if you're doing mountains, think of it in those ways. If you're doing trees, think of it in that way. You have to think as an artist, where's the light coming from? And so that's what I keep doing over and over. And here you'll see that second layer I'm working on right now is trees. So I'm using green and black to get some value in there. I'm adding darker places. I know the picture's in the way. I promise I move it in a second. But you can see how there's, it's not just a solid green. You might be tempted to do that with your colored pencils or even your markers, but try to get some difference in value in there. If you look at the picture I'm working from, there is a lot of different green within the trees. There's dark green, there's lighter green, and I'm trying to capture that. So I want you to do the same thing. Try to get values in there, not just solid colors. This isn't a coloring book page. We're trying to add some depth to it. So now as I add these layers of trees and greenery, I'm using slightly different colors on each step of the way to create a different levels of value, so you can see the separation. So you can see how I use this lighter green in combination with a darker green to have value. I'm going back and pulling the darker value back into the trees there. So you can see that there's a layer there, right? There's a dark green and there's a lighter green, and now I'm working on an even lighter green. And that's what I just keep doing to create this illusion of depth. And guys, even if you do it wrong, even if you don't add the layers right, you do backwards, you go from light to dark instead of dark to light, or whatever it may be, it's still going to look better than if you just do a flat solid color. So I want you to really try to experiment with this idea of depth and showing value in your trees. and your mountains or whatever you choose to do. You don't have to do trees and mountains. You know, it might be a desert in the background. It might be an alien landscape. I don't know what you guys are doing, but you know, use value to your advantage. So I was pretty happy with the way that the trees and all the green turned out. But these close-up trees, the ones that are pine trees that have a little bit darker shadow, I wasn't super pleased with them. I might go back and work on them some more. I like how these trees in the front turned out. I used some yellow in them to kind of make them real bright. But here I'm working on one of those pine trees, and I went overboard with the black. I think I should have probably started with just a dark green and kept going, and I didn't do that. But it's not a total loss. I'm not crying about it or anything. So I'm just about done for this first step. Just remember that I want you to color about half of what you've done so far. So whatever that half is for you, it's always a good idea to work from the top down. That way your hand is not going through whatever it is you're working on and smearing things. So that's why I did that. And so I'd encourage you to do the same. It's not necessarily the funnest way to work because you probably want to color your cabin first, but it's the most sensible. So I look forward to seeing your work, guys. Thank you.